Hey, welcome back to Max Programming, and today we will see what is local storage in JavaScript, and we are going to build a project regarding local storage. So let's get started. So in this video we will cover local storage as I told, and the first thing we'll need is the starter files. Now we are going to build a simple project. So here what you see is what we are going to build, and we are going to use local storage to store our data. So you can enter a student name, you can enter the age of the student and the role or the roll number of the student, and you can just click add student to add that student, and that student will be added on the UI right over here. That student will also be added on in the local storage. So how can we check what is inside of the local storage? Well, you can just go to right click and inspect, and it's the same thing in Firefox, and you can just go to the application tab, and in the application tab you can just go to local storage. Okay, here is where you can see all the local storage. Now local storage is simple. In simple terms, local storage is just an object which is just a key value where you have a key and then you have a value for it. Okay, and the value will be always a string. So whatever you store inside of that object, it will be any if you store an object, if you store an array, if you store true false numbers, that will be added as a string. Okay, and then when you get that item from the local storage, it will be a string also. So let's just try adding something. So I'm gonna go to student name, and I'll say the student name is my name, Usman, and then I can go to the student age, and let's add the age as 16, and the student role, let's add it to be 36. And when I was to click add student, you can see a student is added right over here, and inside of the local storage I have a key that is students, and then I have this whole value, and this is an array that holds these three properties. Okay, so as you can see, I have this as an array. Okay, so this is an array and it holds three properties: name, age, and role. And now if I was to refresh the page, this data won't go because I get that data again from local storage. That's how you use it, right? So this is the introduction to local storage. And if I was to add another student, so let's say it's going to be Jim, and then let's say it's going to be 16 also, 16, and let's say it's going to be 20. So if I was to click on add student, again another student is being added, and if we go back to the dev tools, we will see that Jim is added. Okay, and if I was to refresh again, you'll not see anything go. So this is what we're going to build. The HTML and CSS, we are going to get it, you can get it from my repository. Now we will not do the styling part and all the HTML stuff. We are going to focus on the JavaScript. So I want you to go to this repository, and I'll leave this link in the description, from where you can get all of these three starter files. You can just get this, and the whole code is inside of here. That's what we are going to do. So let's open up index.html and styles.css, and we will not open app.js because what, we don't want to take a look at that. So let's just copy the whole HTML code, and I'll open up VS Code, and I'll just create a new index.html file, and I'll paste all of that inside of here. Okay, so let me just explain. I have body, of course, and then I have a main tag which does nothing, and then I have a form tag with an ID of student form, and then I have three inputs inside of that which has required. And then also, this is important, we are going to use the name attribute. Okay, so we have the name attribute, we are going to use this in our JavaScript to get these inputs, and then finally I have a button to add a student. Okay, so that is our JavaScript, and we link our CSS, and let's just change this title to local storage tutorial. Okay, and hit save, and here we go. Now once that is done, let's grab the CSS for this page. So it's like this, and you know what, it's not actually needed to explain, so let's just create a styles.css file, and let's paste that. So it's basically some styling, some resets, and then the main tag, and then student form, and we're using grid right over here. Okay, it's not a CSS tutorial, so we are going to leave that. Once all of that stuff is done, let's create an app.js, and we are going to keep it empty for now, and let's right click on the HTML file and open with live server. So that will open it up with live server, and the live server is the extension that I am talking about right over here. So I can just search for live server, and that will automatically update our HTML and CSS and JavaScript whenever we edit that. Okay, so you don't need to go ahead and refresh the page whenever you save the file. Okay, so you can just install this live server extension. Once all that is done and we have live server up and running, here it is. Okay, now we can see this this small box because we haven't added JavaScript yet for this. Once that is done, let's just close this up, and let's close this tab, and I'll leave this link in the description below for my repository, and let's close that. So we finally got everything set up right now. So we got the HTML, we got the CSS, and that is it, I hope. Let's get into the code. So I explained you the HTML, and let's control click this JavaScript file to go there. The first thing we are going to do is we are going to get all the elements. So let me just go ahead and say DOM elements. So a simple comment, and let's get this student form very first of all. And as you can see, we have an ID of student form right over here. So we can just say const student form is equal to document dot get element by ID, and then we can pass in the ID, which is student form. Now we got the student form very first of all, and then let's get all of the we got all of these inputs, and we also have this div with the class of students where we are going to store all of these students. Okay, so let's get all of these inputs, or instead of getting the inputs first, let's get this students div first of all. So I'm just going to say const students div, and or instead let's just call it students container, and then I'm going to set it equal to document dot get element by ID, and we are going to say it's going to be dot students because it has a class of students. Okay, it has a class of students. Once you got that, now let's get all of the inputs. Okay, and we added this name attribute. We can catch all of the inputs very easily, so I can just say const name input, and then we can set it to the student form, and we can say it's gonna be name. Okay, so whatever is the name attribute, which in this case is name right over here, as you can see, this name input will become we'll get this input. Okay, so this is the parent student form, and inside of the parent we have this name. Okay, so this is how you catch some random this is how you catch the child elements of parent elements. So now let's just get others. So I'm going to say const age input, which is going to be equal to student form again, and this time is going to be age, and const this is going to be role input, and let's set that to student form, and then it's going to be role. So we got all three inputs right over here. We got both of these things. Now we got all these DOM elements. Now let's create an array. So I'm just gonna say const students will be an empty array as of now. Okay, we got the empty array, and in this array we are just going to push, when we add a student, we are just going to push that element. Now let's create a function. So I'm going to say const, you can also use the function keyword, but let's just use the latest JavaScript. So I'm just going to say const add student, and that will be equal to an arrow function like this. And if you want this arrow like this, I have a video on it, you can check it out. I'll put that in the cards. You got add student. Now this add student function will take in the name, age, and role. So these are the three parameters it's going to take, and then it's going to basically push an object to this. So this our student will look something like this. So let me just add a comment. So this is how our student will look like. It will be an object, and it will have a name property, which will be a string, anything. It will have an age property, which will be any number. and it will have a grade property, or not grade, a role property, which will be a number also. Okay, so this is how our student, our one of the students will look like, and this is how every student is going to look like. So this is the pattern that we are going to follow. Inside of this array we are going to add these kind of objects. So let's just add a simple object as of now. So I'm just going to say an object, and then the name property will be, let's say, Usman, and then the age property will be, let's say, 16, and then the role property will be 36. Now hit save. Now let's try to render out these students. I mean, let's put these students in the DOM. So how do we do that? Well, let's create another function for that. Okay, so let's keep this function unused as of now. So I'm just going to say const create student element. This function is simply a function that will create the student element. Okay, so that will create a student element inside of our students div. So let's see how we can do that. The first step will be, let's say, const student div. Okay, so we'll say const student div, and then we're going to say document dot create element. Okay, and then we have to pass in which element we want to create. So let's just say div. Okay, so this will be the container for each student. Okay, so we're going to create this for each student, and let's create another element, and that will be student name. So I'm going to name it student name, and that will be document dot create element again, and the student name will be h2 heading 2. And let's just copy and paste this, and this one is going to be student age, and this time it's going to be a paragraph tag, and let's duplicate this, and student role, and this one is going to be p as well. So we created 4 elements. Okay, we created 4 elements, and now we'll go over and we'll add something to those elements. Okay, these 4 elements are created, they are not in the DOM, but we are going to add something inside of these elements. We are going to fill those. So I can just say student name first of all dot inner text. Okay, so we're going to add some inner text, and we can say it's going to be student name like this, and then we add a space, and then we add the name property. Now this name simply comes from the parameters, so we are going to have the same parameters inside of the create student element. So we are going to accept the name, we're going to accept the age and the role. Very simple, right? Or instead of these 3 like this, we are going to accept an object which will have these 3. So basically, in simple terms, we are going to pass in an object inside of this create student element. Let's just say it's going to be student. Okay, this is what we will pass, okay, inside of this create student element. So this will be an object, and this will be of type this. Okay, so the student will have these properties. It will have the name, the age, and the role. What we are doing here is we are destructuring the name, the age, and this role. Okay, so we will be basically destructuring these 3 properties. So we don't need to do something like student, let's just say student dot name, and then you have to say student dot age and all that stuff. You don't need to do all this. You can just destructure the properties. So you can just get all of the properties, and then you can just use something like name. That's how you do this. Okay, so this is simple destructuring. We got the student name dot inner text. Let's put the student age dot inner text. That will be the same thing, but it will have student age, and we can put age, and then let's finally add student role dot inner text. Remember, you don't set it equal to that, you set the inner text. That will be student role, and we can concatenate role, and these are the inner texts. Now once we added the inner text, these are not these elements won't show up in the in our app, so we need to show them inside of our app. So what we can do is we can just say student div. Okay, and student div is this element right over here. So we can just append, we can append many elements. So we can we want to append student name. Very first of all, we want to append student age, and then finally we want to append student role. Okay, so this is going to be the form. Student name will be the first element, student age will be the second one, and student role will be the third one. So this is how you append. So inside of this div we append these three elements. That's all. And finally we created this div, so we have to append this div also to somewhere else. So we can just select the students container. If you remember, if I click that, you see students container is the div that we get. Wait a minute, this should not be get element by id, this should be query selector, because we are getting it from a selector right over here. Okay, dot students. Okay, so students container, what you see, and then this is the students container, and what we can do is we can just append child. Now we are using only one child. Okay, we are appending only one element, so we use append child. If you want to append multiple elements, you can use the append. So it's going to be student div, that's it. Hit save, and this is our function. Okay, in a nutshell, what it does is it creates the elements, it adds the inner text, and it appends it. That's what it does. So for a better understanding, I just added these three comments that, you know, say what they do. Now let's call this function. Okay, so what we want to do is this students array. This is an array. So what we can do is we can just add a for each loop. So I can just say students dot for each, and inside of here I can do something like student, and then I can execute an arrow function like this. Okay, so this is how an arrow function looks like. I can use, and I get access to each and every student. If I hover over this, you can see the whole type of this. Okay, so it's going to contain a name, an age, and a role, and the string, number, all this stuff. So I can use this student, and then I can use this whole function. I can just copy and paste this directly. So as I told you, we are going to get the student object right over here, and we are going to destructure the name, age, and role from that. So what we can do is we can just replace this whole function with the create student element, and we are not calling this function. Okay, if we were to call this function, it will you know, execute at real time. We don't want that. We are going to put this function name only, so we are just referencing this function, and when for each loop goes inside that function, it will take in the student. We are destructuring the student, so we are taking the name, age, and role. We are creating the elements and doing all that jazz, and it's done. So let's hit save and let's take a look. So I have a student name, which is Usman right over here. Student age is 16 and role is 36. We got that done. If I was to add another thing to our students array, so let's just go ahead and add one more object. So I'm just going to duplicate this, and I'm going to say the name is going to be, let's say, John, and the age is going to be 18, and then let's say it's going to be 42. And then when you take a look, you'll get another. When I save the file, you see it renders item. Okay, so that is done. Now we can just empty out this array. That's it. Okay, we emptied this array. Now we have this create student element. Now we can simply pass in the student, and that will create the elements, and that's it. Once you got that done, now let's work on adding a student by, you know, the form. Okay, so you know that we have a form. We have this form. Okay, we have this form, and then we have this button which adds a student. So what we can do is we can just say the student form, and we can use an event dot on submit, and that event will be an arrow function. Okay, that like this. So on submit is equal to an arrow function, and then we can get an event parameter from this one. So you got the e, okay, which is simply an event. So the first thing we want to do is we can just say e dot prevent default. Now if you don't know what this stands for, what this means, basically this prevent default function prevents the default behavior of a form submission. So let's try this out. If I was to just, you know, comment this out and do nothing, and if I was to fill anything, and then, you know, it doesn't matter, and if I was to click on add student, you'll see the page will refresh. If I was to add student, you will see the page refreshed, and you have all of these properties which we don't need. So how can we fix this stuff? We don't want the page to refresh, else all of our data will go away. So we use this prevent default to tackle that, and you don't need all this now. Okay, now when I was to put anything inside of this form, and then if I was to add the student, the page will not refresh, and as you can see, I'm clicking this multiple times, the page is not getting refreshed. That's it. Okay, that's what e.prevent default does. And once that is done, now let's create a new student. So the new student will be simply, let's just create a new student and then right over here we'll use the add student function. Now we haven't actually put anything inside of this function yet, but let's just call it. So we call it, and then we have to pass in three things, as I told. As you can see in the IntelliSense, we want the name, so let's just put the name, but name will be name input. So the name input is right over here. This is the name input. So we got the name input dot value. Okay, so this is an input, of course, and then we have this dot value property which gives us the value. Let's add the age, so that will be age input dot value, and finally role input dot value. That is done. We created our student. Now this add student variable, it's going to return us a new student. Let's do that. So this add student will simply, very easily, as I told, it's going to push a new student. So let's just say it's going to be students array, and let's say dot push, and it's going to push an object. Okay, and this object will contain name, will be the name, age will be age, and role will be role. Oops. Whew. Okay, so this name is this, and then age and role are these and these. Okay, now the property, the key and the value name are, you know, similar, so we can just get rid of this, and we can just say name, age and role, and that will automatically detect it. And finally let's just return it. So return will return an object with the name, age and role. That is it. Okay, that is it. So we did all of this stuff, we pushed the student and we returned it, so we get the new student back. Okay, now this new student will be of type this, as you can see. Now finally let's just create the student element. So I can just call the create student element again, and I can pass in the new student. And as you can see, as I told, this new student will go inside of this. It will have name, age and role. It will create the student elements, and that's it. You got that done. And then let's just put the name input dot value is equal to blank, and let's do the same for age input and role input. Now we got all of this stuff done, and this is simply to, you know, make the inputs make the value of the inputs completely vanished. Okay, so let's just clearing the inputs. Finally our whole app is done, but it's done. Okay, we can add a student, so let's just try adding one, with some dummy data, and first to hit enter, I can add a student. I can add another student, so let's just add another student with any dummy data, and we added another student. That's it. But when we refresh the page, they are gone. So let's just add, now let's add the local storage functionality. That will be very fun. It's very easy. So the first thing we want to do is we want to set the item. Okay, so basically we want to create an object, or we want to set an object. So what we can do is we can just go inside this add student function. So when we add a student, before returning and after creating the student, what we can do is we can just go ahead and we can say local storage. We are using local storage, and I can say dot set item. So this set item takes in a key and a value. Okay, so the key, as I told, will be an object key and then a string value. Okay, so just a name and then the value. So the name for our item will be students. We're going to create an array called students. We're going to create an item inside of the local storage called students, and then add a comma, and then the value will be a string, so we can just use the students array. Now in simple terms, local storage.set item will convert this to an array. As you know, the students, as you can see, this is an array, and set item will automatically convert it to a string, but it's better to convert it to a string, right? Or there might be any problems in the future. So let's just go ahead, and if you want to convert an array to a string, what you can use, you can just say JSON dot stringify and then call that and then put the value. Okay, so the value is students. That is it. So JSON.stringify will convert any object or anything, just anything, to a string. Okay, that's it. So we set the item whenever we add a student. We set the item, that's fine, but when do we get the item? We also want to get the item. How can we get the item? Because whenever, if I show you right now, if I was to add a student, let's just say me, and then anything, if I was to click on add student, that student gets added. And if we also check in the application tab, if I go to local storage, that student is added. As you can see, the age is 5 and role is 6 and name is Usman. Everything is working fine, but when I was to refresh the page, I don't see anything. I just see nothing. Why is that? Even though I have the student inside my local storage, because I have the student, I have not got the student back. Okay, I have not got the student back. So how can I get that student back? That's simple. Also, what we can do is we can just go to the variable we created, so this students array, and instead of putting this as an empty array, because whenever we refresh, this is an empty array. Okay, this is nothing but an empty array. So what we can do is we can just put local storage dot get item. That's it, and then you just pass in the key. Okay, the key, as you can see, this, when we set the item, the key was students. So let's just copy and paste this. So get item students, and that will return us a string. This is where a lot of developers get stuck. Okay, so when you get the item, it returns you a string. So in the end, the students will be a string. As you can see, when I hover over something, it gives me the type of that thing. So our students array will not be an array, it will be a string. So we need to convert this to an array, right? Because that's not what we want. We don't want the string, we want an array. So how can we convert this to an array? Well, again, we can use the JSON object. So I can just wrap this inside of JSON dot parse. Okay, this time it's going to be the parse function, and we can just put this inside of the parse function. This will convert, this parse will convert any string, or this parse will convert any string to any, whatever object we have or whatever. Okay, an array or whatever that will be, whatever that string will be. So now we can set or to an empty array. Okay, why do I need this or? Well, if I don't have this students local storage item, which I won't have if I'm visiting the site for the first time, then I obviously want to set this to an empty array, right? That's it. Hit save, and now what you'll see, if we go back, you'll see our student, and this is in our local storage. So I can just add another student with dummy data, add student, and this is added. And if I was to refresh the page, I still have that, and that is inside of our local storage. Now let's just clear this. So I can just go to this and I can right click and delete this, and then now if I refresh, all the students are gone, but we still have this box. We don't want this box, so let's just go ahead and remove this box, and it's very easy. And how do we remove that? Well, whenever you create the student element, or whenever we do something else, we are going to say students div, students container, I'm sorry. So this is this students container, and the styles are added to this class. Okay, dot students, we can say students container dot style, dot style, and then I can say dot display will be none. Actually, this will not be none, so we'll add a condition. If the students dot length is equal to 0, then it's going to be none, else it's going to be flex. Okay, what is this? Well, this is a ternary operator. I have a video on the ternary operator if you want to check. So we're just checking that it's just a replacement to if else. So I have students dot length, if it is 0, so that means if it is an empty array, the display of this container will be none, so this container will not show up, and else it's going to be flex, which is the default thing that we have. Okay, so let's just copy this and put it outside here. Okay, so we also want to put it right over here. Hit save, and I think we don't need it here. It's fine if we don't put it here because we actually put it outside. So let's just save that and let's go back to our web browser, and now as you can see it's not showing up even though if I refresh any time. So if I was to just add some dummy data, if I was to add student, okay, so that didn't work. Okay, that didn't work because I did not add this condition at inside of this function, because you know, whenever you create a student element, you check again and then you add this you know, none or flex. Okay, so that was one of the mistakes. And let's go back and you see the student. If I was to refresh and let's clear this, so I can just also go ahead and clear the whole local storage from there, and let's add a student, let's add another student, and those will be stored in the local storage. I hope this video helped you. Please like it, share it to others, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Finally, thanks for watching.